Hey everybody, how's it going? What's happening? What's going on? Dan Shinder here live on the Drum Talk TV FB page, and FB can stand for whatever the FB you want. How's that? I'm coming to you from Drum Talk TV headquarters in Globe, Arizona, 100 miles east of Phoenix in the mountains, and our wonderful guest today, third guest today, because we had Anna Canals and Emmanuel Caplet on earlier. Look for that if you're watching it on the archive. But today, this afternoon, we have Jonathan Joseph, who's coming to us from the Treasure Coast, the east coast of beautiful, sunny Florida. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, too. So excited to have you on. So much I want to talk about. And, folks, we will have questions that you could chime in with. And Jonathan has some deep gospel roots, but also ended up playing with legendary Jeff Beck for 5 years. Let's kind of skip around and start with Jeff Beck. First of all, if you don't mind me asking, how did you get the gig, and how did all that unfold, and what was it like working with such a legendary player?
Well, how I got the gig was an interesting story. My stepdaughter, Joss Stone, I was taking her to the airport. And in England, when I'm there, we live about 3 hours outside of London. So, it's quite a drive. So we were on the expressway or the motorway passing through Bristol. And we were talking about something, and I just made like this off-the-cuff comment, which was, listen, if you ever speak with Jeff, tell him I'd love to audition for his band, in the event Vinny can't make it, because, he's been playing with him for years.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she said, really? I said, well, yeah. So she picks up her phone, because I was driving. She picks up her phone and she calls Jeff. And,
wow.
Yeah, it was like right then. And they were on the phone for like 10 minutes. And then like all of a sudden she says, listen, I know this really great drummer who would like to audition for your band, in the event that Vinny can't make it. She said the exact same thing. And at the time, my wife and I, and Joss as well, we owned a live music venue in Exeter, England, called Mama Stone's. Oh. And yeah, so it was a live music venue and Mexican restaurant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, we would have acts, in on a weekly basis. And she just said to Jeff, she said, listen, why don't you come down and let's do a gig at the club? So that's exactly what happened. Like 2 months later, I think that was in like October, and then the first week of December of 2012, something like that. He came down with his wife, Sandra, and they stayed at our home. And it was really kind of surreal. Because, he was like sitting there at my breakfast table.
Yeah, Jeff Beck.
Yeah. And the other thing is, when I was 14 years old, I was introduced to Jeff's music via the album Wired, via my older brother.
Yeah, I remember when Wired came out.
Yeah, he came home, back in those days they had those big beat boxes that, you put one on your shoulder.
Yeah.
So he came home with this blaring music, and I'd never heard anything like that before. And he came in, and I was standing there on the stairs, and I said, "Man, who is that?" And he says, "Man, that's Jeff Beck, Wired." And I stood there, and the song Sophie was playing. It was written by Narada Michael Walton.
Yeah.
And I stood there listening, and I at that moment, like my whole musical trajectory changed.
Wow.
From that moment, I was on the course of improvisational music. Because
and where were you before that? What was your path? Gospel, right?
Gospel, yeah. I grew up in the Church of God in Christ, which is a Pentecostal denomination, which is, again, back then, like the majority of the Black vocalists that you heard on the radio singing R&B came out of this particular denomination of the church. So, the Church of God in Christ was known for its harmonic interpretations in gospel music, which is what you hear in contemporary gospel music today. Everyone's doing it now, but back then it was really exclusive to one denomination. And before everyone I started picking that up. So that's what I was doing before, and then eventually, so like 14, 15 years old, we formed a rock band with some of my friends that lived down the street, and I had another friend, Paul Feltman. He had a great rock band, but he was like a year or two older than I was, so they had like this great band, and I always like wanted to be like in their band, but I was, like the little guy. And
that was like me. I was always the youngest one. Now I'm the oldest one. I don't know how that happened. Seriously.
Right. Yeah. So that's how I started working with Jeff. So we did the concert at Mama Stone's, and the next day we had a 12-hour rehearsal. Jeff is
nice.
Now he's I think he's going to be 73 this year.
Yeah.
But so he was still, I guess, maybe like 68 or 69. But he's just got that kind of energy that just doesn't ever end.
Yeah.
Which can be really depleting for a gun.
Yeah. Definitely.
But, so the next day we're back there at the breakfast table again, and I'm making coffee, and Jeff and Sandra and my wife Wendy, sitting there at the table, and I'm like looking around, and I still can't really believe this is happening.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there on his computer, and he's like looking at these different things on his computer. And he starts telling me about this new project that he wants to put together. He wants me to play drums.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how it happened. So, my first gig as an official member of the Jeff Beck, band or Jeff Beck group, was at the Crossroads Guitar Festival in 2013.
Wow.
At Madison Square Garden.
What an experience. Well, in the 5 years that you spent with Jeff so far, what's been your biggest takeaway as a professional musician that you could pass on to others, something you learned from the experience of working with Jeff?
The biggest takeaway. Well, when you pose that question, it immediately makes me think of who Jeff is, what he likes, and what he doesn't like.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly, I think one of the big things is kind of knowing the artist that you're working with and understanding how they tick, which
and their
usually,
sensibilities and everything.
Yeah, which usually I think takes a minute to figure out.
Sure.
If it's someone that's new, it takes time to figure out what to do and what not to do.
Right.
Like, for example, like Jeff is someone that never likes to wait. So one thing you don't do with Jeff is ever keep him waiting.
Yeah. Especially if you're a drummer. Drummers should always be on time.
Yes, exactly. But no, seriously, like if you're at the hotel and you got a lobby call, 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
You don't want to be there at like 12:01.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing with Jeff. So it's just like kind of, I won't say little things like that because that's actually a really big thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
On gigs like Jeff's, you're really well paid. So for that, it's just like certain things that exist maybe on some other gigs just can't ever happen.
Yeah.
It's funny because I find that there's kind of like, while the music community is like a large community, certainly in America, at the same time it's really small.
Yeah.
A lot of people know each other, within the world of music.
And the talk.
Yes, and the talk and word gets around, quite quickly. So it's important to understand what your role is, and above all, to understand what it means to be a professional.
Yeah.
As opposed to a lounge player.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lots of guys don't understand. Everyone's got an opinion. They criticize, guys who are on all of these gigs. There's a reason why they are on all of those gigs.
Yeah.
Great
point.
It's not just because they're great players.
Right.
Right. Because at some point, everyone knows how to play.
Yeah. And can learn a song.
And there are thousands of great drummers.
Yeah.
Thousands of guys that know how to groove. But do you actually understand the actual dynamics in your environment that make people want to have you around, as opposed to make people want to run away from you, or be in an opposite space from you.
Right. Right. That's great advice. That's great.
Yeah. I just really, I mean, on the project that I'm working on right now, I've actually had to fire some people because,
really?
Yeah, because they just didn't understand that, you can't come to a rehearsal unprepared.
Right.
You have to go home and practice.
Yeah.
Like when people are paying you to know something, guess what? You need to know it. You need to come in prepared and ready to play. And like I always say, generally speaking, the rehearsal is not a place to learn the song. It's a place to rehearse the song.
Right.
So what's the difference between the two? Well, the difference is you do your studying at home so that you can come in and make music
and bring it
and bring it. And there's always a degree of flexibility in that, because you may have to spend some time talking about a few chord changes or whatever,
Right.
But generally you need to know what you're doing. I mean, if they forwarded the music in advance, and it's not like a thing where you got the call last night and now you're supposed to be here like 12 hours later, which also happens at the time.
Sure.
I mean, that's a different set of circumstances. But if you've been given like advance warning and the charts or whatever it is, the audio, the MP3s, videos, all those links, and, you need to come ready to play.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, you can't expect to make good money. You're always going to be like on this kind of like club level, being one of those guys with an opinion.
Yeah. Do you want to be on the court or do you want to be on the bench?
Exactly.
Right? That's about it.
Yeah.
I love that. Just one more Jeff question, and then I'd love to talk about your new project because we're very interested in that. When you played live, was there a part of the set that you really always looked forward to? And whether it's a certain song or maybe a section of the set that just had a few songs in a row that really always did it for you, that as a drummer and musician, you were excited to play every night?
Not really, man. I was excited to be on stage with Jeff from the time we walked out on the stage to the time we walked off the stage.
Awesome. Yeah.
His songbook, it's an incredible songbook. It's a historic songbook. It's a historic drum chair.
Yeah.
It just isn't. I don't even know how to describe. I don't have words to describe, the experience of sharing the stage with him.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, it's a true legacy.
Yeah, and his sound. I mean, it's loud. I mean, it's like unbelievably loud. But I've learned that with that type of volume, like something happens, within the structure of the atoms.
Yeah.
And it takes on like some kind of like different thing,
Yeah, absolutely. He's such a unique player and has such a unique sound. And it's interesting when you look at that. Of course, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, all met in art school. They came from the same roots and all that. And well, Jimmy and Eric certainly have their own sounds and all of that, their own legacies. They kind of were on a path like this, and Jeff sort of went that way and just took it all in a whole other, dimension, crossing way over into fusion and keeping the blues roots and all of that. Really interesting diversity that he mixed together.
Yes. Yeah. Jeff is a guy that is always really searching for something new, searching for a different inspiration, which is why I was hired. I think he had a run with Vinny and Tal at that time, and then was just looking for something different.
Yeah.
And now he's back with Vinny again, but not with Tal. So it's that's a slightly different dynamic.
Yeah.
So he's always kind of like pushing himself to be into something different than what he's done before. If he has the choice, that's what he'll go for every time.
Awesome. Thanks for the insight on that experience and the history. That's great.
Yeah.
So let's talk more about your new project.
Wow. Which one?
Let's start with the one with Israel. I'm sorry.
Israel. Yes. Yeah. There's. I started working last year with a woman. Her name is Crystal Walker, and she does a theatrical presentation of the death and burial of Jesus. Around Easter time. Mm-hmm. And last year was my first year being involved as kind of like producer / musical director, of this project. And, we had a good performance last year, but this year it's just kind of like growing exponentially. And, this year we have like a 16-piece string section along with a 5-piece rhythm section. I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys are, I'm on my phone.
The little buzz, that's okay. Is it your phone vibrating?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so we have a 16-piece string section, 5-piece rhythm section, an 11-voice praise team.
Wow.
If you know what that is, that's like the primary voices that are in the choir, that ones that are. And then a choir,
Wow.
And then there's dancers, and then Crystal, she's like an orator. So she kind of like speaks and delivers the story of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. But this year, she really, kind of like topped herself, and she booked Israel Houghton as the host and special guest for this year's presentation. So for those of you who aren't familiar with his work, if you go onto YouTube and just put in Israel Houghton and the New Breed, you'll be able to pull up, some of his music. So he's an incredible vocalist / guitarist, and he's just got some incredible contemporary gospel, like high impact. When you think kind of like gospel chops and like gospel music, this is like definitely one of the guys that you want to put. Like Fred Hammond.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
he'll be coming in town on Sunday, and I've been kind of like liaising with his musical director. I believe his name is Matt Edwards, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So just I was in the rehearsal last night. We had a run through with the entire production, so that was good because it kind of let me know everything that we need to correct. So this particular project has a lot of moving parts.
It sounds like a pretty big production.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did was part of the mandate for this year was to have more original content, because what Crystal was doing previously, she was using kind of like more historic, kind of like classic gospel or more traditional gospel arrangements and things. Mm-hmm. This year, now that she's brought in this string section, rather than playing things like Handel's Messiah and like the usual things that you hear, the mandate was, let's create original string parts for the production.
That's great. Literally like building a musical production.
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time in the studio. We recorded one track called This Cup, which is a single that's going to be released just after this show. And I think I'm going to be out in Vegas for a big gospel festival. It's a 3-day festival at the end of this month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'll be out there, not playing, but I guess more in like a managerial role, while the girl Tanyasa, who sang the track, and Crystal, who kind of like narrates a bit during the track. It's a bit kind of like a Kirk Franklin thing, if you're familiar.
Oh, yeah.
Kirk, he's not a guy who sings, but he does like a lot of talking, like over the top of people who are singing.
Yeah. How neat.
Yeah, so it's a bit like that.
That's great.
It's cool. I'm enjoying it. My music history is quite diverse.
Yeah, let's go to that. Let's start with, what was it that you saw or heard that made you say, I want to play drums. I want to do that. I want to be a drummer.
I was 5 years old, and I went to church, and it was a gospel musical. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there in the back of the church, and I saw the guy up in the pulpit. His name was Kenny Day. I saw Kenny Day, in the pulpit playing an orange sparkle drum set.
Ooh.
This was back. It must have been like, I don't know, 71 or something like that. And I was just enamored with the drums. And I walked out. And he had broken a drumstick, and I picked up the drumstick and I took it home with me, and I begged my mother for the rest of that year to get me a drum set. And then when I was 6 years old on Christmas, I woke up Christmas morning and there was a Ludwig standard snare, a 5.5 by 5.
Wow.
Snare drum. That was the beginning.
That's awesome. That's great. And who, as you started to play, and of course, we're about the same age, we didn't have YouTube back then. There wasn't that much on television. So for those of you under 40 or 30, it was very different. We didn't have the resources. So what were your influences then? Was it radio and records that turned you on to stuff, and of course at church?
It was, I think, primarily the people that were involved in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Really good drummers, in the church. And one of my best and longest and closest friends, Willie Goletz, who now lives just outside of Dallas. He's not really playing drums anymore now, but certainly back then, like from the age of 2, he was like the guru, within the state of Florida, basically, because we have church conventions and different things where people in the region would get together.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, it was quite a camaraderie of musicians, that were playing gospel music and just kind of doing things. Yeah. And it was very difficult for me back then because I wasn't very good.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I had really no concept of groove or how to pocket or anything. I just wanted kind of to play. So they would throw me off. They would throw me off the drum sets, like in the middle of the song.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting how things can change.
It is, isn't it? But, it's, I in the projects and the things that I do, I have very little patience for people who don't take their craft seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, I've been fortunate enough to be on stage with some of the greatest musical minds of the modern era. And there's certain things, that I've learned from watching these people,
Sure. And that's the way it should be. We should always be learning, and we should certainly be learning from those who have had success ahead of us as well.
Yeah. My video seems to be weirding out. I don't know if you're experiencing that.
No, Mars is totally clear on this side.
Okay, very good. That might just cleared up. Okay. So it's really, I think from my from the abuse that I suffered as a child, it really pushed me to my purpose because I had decided back then, I'm not going to continue to be thrown off the drums. So
good. You did take those experiences as lessons, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Good. I mean, they were really painful.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Then there was another guy, I don't know, when I was 12 years old. I think there was another guy who was, he was a good drummer. I can't remember his name, but I think he really liked my sister.
Uh-huh.
So he kind of took me under his wing and, gave me some instruction as to what I needed to do to get better. So that really helped.
That's great.
Yeah, that really helps. But I just made up my mind from that time. Listen, I'm not going to be defeated.
Right.
I'm going to play this instrument, and I set out to do just that.
That's great. You got serious at a very young age.
Yeah.
And speaking of learning from success and others who have success, you're a 2-time Grammy winner. Talk about the 2 projects that you're able to be graced with and then win Grammys. Let us learn from that.
Well, The two, one of the Grammys is for drumming. The other is actually from engineering.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, yeah. So the first one I got as a part of the Randy Brecker's group. We did an album, I believe it was in 1997, called Into the Sun.
Yeah.
And, it was a great album, which was produced by Gil Goldstein, and Bagiti Kamalo was on bass. He was played with Paul Simon. Adam Rogers was on guitar, brilliant jazz guitarist out of New York. So, it was a great project. And, of course, Randy is a great writer.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that the record was going to do as well as it did, in terms of being acknowledged for a body of work by the Grammys.
Yeah.
I was shocked when I found out that, the album had won the Grammy, and, I sent off from my plaque.
Yeah.
Yes. So that was the first one. And then the second one came in, I think it was 2010. And that one, I recorded the song This Little Light of Mine. Joss was singing it. And we recorded it in the studio, but the idea was to kind of make it sound like we were like outside at like a campfire type, like an outdoor thing.
Yeah.
So, we did that. And that song was a part of... I can't remember the name of the record, but it featured various artists like John Bon Jovi, I think the Neville Brothers, and they were all doing like gospel songs.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so that album, ended up winning a Grammy Award, and because of my participation in that, the work that I did with Joss, I got another plaque, for that as well. So
and that was for engineering, you said, right?
For engineering, yeah. Yeah.
On the subject of engineering and recording in the area of drums, and I know that audio and mixes and even mastering and all of that, I know that it's so subjective. However, can you think of anything that you've seen and heard that's a common mistake as far as misengineering drum sounds, whether it's in the poor mic technique or not the correct mics for the right drums or overuse of certain effects or anything like that you can share with us to kind of give people, open their minds a little bit more about engineering drum sounds?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things for me, deals with understanding the EQ range of your particular drum set. Like for example, on my drums, generally between 500 hertz and 250 hertz. That's kind of like a gray area for those frequencies create what I'll describe as the boxy tom sound.
Yeah.
And if you've got that box sound, it's probably because you've got too many frequencies between 250 and 500.
Oh, interesting. They're just fighting against each other, like cluttered in a small area, right?
Well, it's not so much of that as it is that those frequencies aren't really good for toms.
Got it.
Whether if you're rock, maybe it's a little different if you're playing like straight ahead jazz, because you're not looking for the girth in the sound in that idiom music. But if you're doing like gospel, funk, R&B, rock, anything that's where you're kind of heavy hitting, you want that big thunder, that thunder drum sound. Then definitely you probably want to avoid between 250 and 500 on your toms. And then it's good to take your EQ and just kind of scan to figure out where the sweet frequencies are. And then you want to boost those to enhance your tom sound and your bass drum. That
makes sense.
Generally on a bass drum, on a 22-inch kick, it's like 60 hertz is where the robust warmth of the sound is.
Yeah.
You boost 60 and boom, there it is. It's hitting you in the chest like what you want, So it's good to understand what makes your drums sound good from an engineering standpoint. Because if you can communicate that to the engineer,
Mm-hmm.
you'll have a much your experience will just be a lot better. And the reason why I got into engineering was because I was tired of people wrecking my drums,
Screwing up your sound. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what I love about this advice is that it urges drummers to really become familiar with their instrument organically first, so that you understand what's going to work in the studio and hitting those sweet frequencies, as you mentioned. That's important.
Yes, yeah. Here's another tip. I'll give you, for the community, at large. On a snare drum, if you want more attack on your snare drum, try boosting 1.7K.
Mm.
That's where the attack kind of comes. When you hit a rim shot.
Yeah, you get that crack.
Yeah, not a rim tap, but a rim shot.
Yeah, yeah.
That's where you get that crack. 1.7 will boost that. Here's another trick. With your snare drum, if you're doing like any type of popular music or anything like that, once you EQ the snare, try using 3 different reverbs.
Mm.
Set as the following. The first one is super short. And maybe you want to use something like a snare plate, because a snare plate is a really bright, crisp sounding reverb.
Yeah.
And you want to use something really short, no longer than 20 milliseconds. And you can EQ the reverb so that when you hit the snare drum, it enhances the brightness of the feel. Because sometimes you can get a little bit of that if you're miking the bottom of the snares. You can get a bit of that brightness. But it's different if you try this trick and just use a snare plate and brighten the snare plate and have it really short, not longer than 20 milliseconds, and maybe a pre-delay of 10 milliseconds. Generally speaking, unless you want your drums to sound like they're off in the distance, you want to use pre-delay on the reverb.
Got it. Yeah, right? Yeah.
So
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know what pre-delay is, it's the distance of the effect off of the actual primary sound of the drum.
Right.
So if you were to clap your hand, you hear the reverberation bounce off the wall. That's pre-delay. The time it takes you to hear it. Yeah. So then,
that's great.
With the second reverb, try something like a room that's set to be maybe no longer than 50 milliseconds. So this is increasing the girth of the drum.
Right. It brings out a bit more of a live sound, if you will.
Yeah, and the warmth in the drum. This one's not meant to be bright. So you've already covered the bright aspect of it.
Right.
With a room, a short room, you're just going to increase the girth, fatten it up a bit. And then the third one, you just use the third one, whatever reverb you're using on the rest of the kit. To add that ambience.
Yeah, have it blend in.
Yeah, and then you just kind of tweak the levels so that you get a nice mix of the 3.
That's great.
This is like a trick to really getting a great snare drum sound. Most people think you just have a great sounding snare drum, and then you put on a reverb, and then there it is. And it can be. It can be. But
that's great advice. I want to check the comments, see if we have some shout outs from people watching from around the world, and also see if anyone has any questions. Well, here's a true story. Matt Ginsberg says Jonathan is badass. So there you go. And let's see. So here's an interesting question. How would you describe this? Because there are people, whether it's an age thing or a cultural thing. In fact, this question comes from a super fan, Ashish, from Nepal. He's asking, what is gospel music? So how would you describe gospel music? And I know it's morphed over the years, but the fundamentals are still basically the same.
Yeah. Well, gospel music is effectively the celebration of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And it reflects around the four gospels in the Bible. So it's a very spiritual music, and it comes from the deepest recesses of one's soul. Now I understand his question, because I've been all over the world, and people don't understand because they don't have like a black gospel church, in their culture.
Right.
They don't understand how, this music has come about.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I would say, go onto YouTube and put in contemporary gospel music and listen to it. Because if you don't really have a point of reference, you have to figure out a way to be able to get in touch with what it is so that you can begin to analyze it and see the nature, how it affects you.
Right.
Because I would imagine it affects different people differently, depending
Sure.
on your background and experience. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Good question, Ashish. Thank you for that. Daniel A. Drapkin says, "Hey, Jonathan. Hey, Dan. Hey, back at you, Daniel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in." You mentioned, as a professional touring musician, you've been all over the world. Are there a couple destinations that are special for you when you see them on an itinerary? You look forward to them more than any other place for whatever reason, whether it's the food or the venue or the culture or the people or the weather?
That's a good question. Not really.
Really? I'm surprised. That's cool, though.
I mean, obviously, like some gigs are cooler than others, But I can't say that there's a place or a couple places that I always look forward to going back to.
Okay.
Because I guess for me, the music, it's not about a location.
Yeah.
It's just simply about the music, and wherever I am, I'm trying to execute the music,
Yeah.
to the best of my ability. And when you're on gigs with Jeff, certain things are basically really consistent, like the quality of your sound,
Right.
and because like music is done the way it is now, like with me being on ears,
Yeah.
I'm not really hearing what is happening in the ambient world.
Right. From the audience.
I'm in my own world. I mean,
Yeah.
that world is pretty consistent every night.
Yeah.
And then also the other thing is generally you don't really stay in these places very long. So,
Exactly. Yeah, there's not a lot of time always to experience where you're at.
yeah.
Cool.
And then there's also, at this age, there's the exhaustion factor.
Yeah.
So it's like when I was younger, we get to a town and I go like walk around and stuff. I don't do that.
Right. You gotta save, conserve for the show.
Yes.
Yeah, and pace yourself even then.
Yeah.
That's cool. So I have a Jonathan Joseph fun fact question, okay?
Yes.
When you're not engineering, when you're not working on your skills, when you're not recording or touring, when you're not doing music, what do you like to do? How do you like to spend your time?
Well, lately I've been my wife and I. My wife is like really incredible. She's a really incredible decorator.
Oh.
Yeah. So we've got these rental properties here in Florida, and we've been renovating them and doing kind of like property management and things.
Yeah.
So, and I'm actually in one of our properties right now.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So that's kind of been taking up my other time in between kind of music projects and stuff,
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So it has nothing to do with music. So I think that's good, sometimes.
I agree. I think we need to step back sometimes and remove ourselves. And when we get back to it, there's that sort of refresher sort of experience that happens, and maybe it influences our approach is a bit fresher, it can also prevent one from getting too burnt out from just doing the same thing over and over, of course, too.
Yeah.
Kind of remove yourself from it a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I find it's funny because my wife said to me just the other day, because I've been lately, like in the last 2 weeks, I've been on this, I've been kind of like back into practicing because we finished the last house. Now I can get like my mind back on music, back in that woodshed.
Yeah.
And she says, well, you seem to practice in flurries.
That's funny.
and I said, yeah, I think you're probably right, because I'm not always practicing because I don't always have time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
At this point in my life, I have, my wife and I, we have 6 kids between us, and all of them are adults.
Yeah. We have 11.
Really?
Yeah, that's why we moved away to the mountains.
Yeah, there you go.
11 kids, 25 to 43, and 19 grandkids, 10 months to 18 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
crazy.
Insane. Yeah.
And are your kids close to you nearby, or are they spread around?
The closest is my son. He lives over on the west coast of Florida in Fort Myers.
Okay.
But my daughter is in Los Angeles, and I'll be going out there next Wednesday.
Oh, great.
To do actually shooting a video for the foot pedal company that I endorse.
Oh, nice. What part of LA? I grew up in LA.
Oh, is it Sherman Oaks?
Sherman Oaks. Yeah, I grew up in the valley there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in West Hills. I'm very familiar with that area. That's great.
Yeah.
Tell the traffic I said hello.
Yeah, right.
405 and 101, I do not miss that.
There you go, yeah. Yeah, I think it's the 101 to get there, if I'm not mistaken.
The Ventura Freeway, yeah. Oh, that's great. Cool. It's great that you have something that you do with your wife like that, too. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny, my wife and I, we're really like an effective team because we had our live music venue, which we started at our home in England, as a artist development company that kind of morphed into this live music venue and restaurant.
That's great. That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, awesome. We've been working various projects and things. Years ago, she managed, her daughter Joss. So, yeah, we're just kind of into different things now, and kind of looking at retirement, like the next 10 years. Like, okay, well, where do we want to be?
Yeah, we've been talking about that too.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for making time to come on and for sharing such wisdom from your wonderful experiences. And anytime that you want to come on and promote something or just talk about recording drums, playing drums, setting up drums, tuning drums, selecting drums, whatever, just let me know. We'll have the conversation. I know our audience loves it, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad we were finally able to sort this out.
Yeah, that's the fun part that people don't know behind the scenes, juggling schedules and sometimes having to change stuff last minute because life happens and stuff comes up. Right. So yeah, the feeling is absolutely mutual that I'm very happy that we're stuck with it and able to make this happen, and you're welcome to come on anytime. And thank you to everybody watching and who follows Drum Talk TV. I hope you got a lot out of that. We'd love to receive some videos that have something in the description saying, hey, I saw the interview with Jonathan Joseph, check out my snare sound. So
there you go.
Right?
There you go.
And I'll let you know. So take those lessons from Jonathan and apply them to your recordings, and let's hear it. Send it through. The portal's on the website. It's easy, and we'll put you folks up. So thank you, Jonathan. Hang on for a moment, and thank you, everybody, again, for tuning in to myself and Jonathan Joseph here on Drum Talk TV. We'll see you again soon. Thanks.